Hello, everyone. How you feel? How you feel? I'm back. I'm back. I'm back. That was really good. I was taking lots of notes as if I was in class. I think one thing that I'm gonna leave and take away with is you often forget as we're trying to change this energy sector of how much a collaborative process that it is and it takes. I like how you said it's not just about the light bulb, but it's about the entire house. And so let's give it up for Dr. Michaela one more time again. All right, coming up, we have another, again, continuing the conversation. And I'm going to use Dr. Michaela's terminology in terms of the collaborative sector, because next we have the countdown to COP29, how executives are shaping global action plans to deliver 2030 goals, where our speakers will discuss the necessity to bring the voice of the private sector into climate change conversations to help shape our collective futures. Please welcome to the stage Dr. Peter Schlosser.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this session on the countdown to COP29, Conference of the Parties. How executives are shaping global action plans to deliver 2030 goals. So you already see we are looking not just at 29, but 30 in Brazil. I'm really pleased to have a distinguished panel with me, and we'll give you a short introduction of the panelists because you will find detailed information in your materials. To my right is Emily Olson, who is Chief Sustainability and Corporate Affairs Officer at Whale Base Metals. Next to her is Jason Weller, who is the Global Chief Sustainability Officer at JBS. It's a food company, for those of you who are not aware of that. Then we have Maya Hari, who is the CEO of Terrascope. And to the right, we have Rohini Sengupta, who is Director of Environmental Sustainability at United Airlines. So just a little bit of context. We don't have that much time, so I will keep that short. You all know that climate change is progressing. We thought 2023 might have been a bit of an anomaly in terms of the heat because of El Nino and a few other factors. But voila, 2024 was the hottest summer. July 24 was the hottest month ever measured. So the task is clear. The pressure is there. It is increasing. In my view, there is no chance we will hold at 1.5 degrees Celsius. So given that, the decisions, the discussions and the decisions at the conferences of the party, the next one in Baku between November 11 and 22, are really important in terms of how are we proceeding. And increasingly, the private sector has to play an important role in moving us forward towards the goals that have been set. So let's get into the question then. And I will start with Emily. Emily, you are the Chief Sustainability and Corporate Affairs Officer of a company that is dedicated to mining and to sustainable mining. So what does that actually mean? How can you extract sustainably large amounts of ore that we use in virtually everything we do in our life?
No, absolutely. I think that's probably a question I get on a regular basis, right? People often look at it as a zero-sum game. You're either a miner or you're sustainable, and I think that is where the industry, and particularly a company like Vale on the base metal side. So I represent the copper, the nickel, the cobalt side of our business. Where, as I said to you earlier, I think it lays with the proof is in the pudding, so to speak. Being able to demonstrate your commitment, not just talk to it. And so when I think about my role and how we're looking at our business moving forward, it's a growth business. You all are very familiar with the supply and demand curves we see on the critical mineral side, both on the energy transition demand and security side. And so really being very thoughtful and very deliberate in how you're incorporating and integrating not just decarbonization. I spend a lot of time talking about, when we talk about ESG, it's holistic. When we talk about enhancing the ambition and enabling action. There's tactical and there's strategic in my mind from a corporate perspective. On the tactical side, you need the tactics in order to get that company buy-in, to get everyone to understand their role in this journey. It's not just a slogan. There's meaningful business delivery that is attached to those commitments we have made. And so for us, really integrating our decarbonization, our social impacts, our community programs, that needs to start at the beginning of a project. It's integrated in your life of mine planning. It's integrated in how you manage your assets. So it's not one of those afterthoughts for a mining company. And when we talk about sustainability, we mean that. From the core, from the start of what we do, we need to be integrating and thinking what that next generation will need to be managing, right? It's a generational business. And so really embedding the decarbonization, the social, and the community elements in the FEL 1 stage of all of our developments is really crucial because it also lays a track record. We put out a plan, and we're measured, and our expectations are to deliver those plans. And so again, in my mind, mining absolutely can be sustainable, but you need partnership, and you need to really deliver on the roadmap you set forward and not stop. So when things don't go your way, don't change course. You keep going back, and I think we very much do that in our own business. And like I said, we have a large growth portfolio that will very much be anchored in these principles.
Jason, JBS is a food business, and we all know that producing food, the food system, is putting pressure on all elements from climate to other environmental practices. JBS has very ambitious goals to be net zero by 2050, cut emissions by 30% by 2030, but it also has something that tickled my interest, saying that it ties compensation of executives to their environmental outcomes. How does that work? Is there some tension between reaching these sustainability goals and reaching economic goals?
Absolutely, there's a tension. Just for the audience and for folks listening, though, just a brief introduction to JBS for folks who aren't familiar with us. We are a global food company. We're predominantly a global protein company. So we're founded and based in Sao Paulo, Brazil, but we operate across over 20 countries, across 6 continents. We have 600 production facilities around the world. We are focused in animal protein, so beef, pork, and chicken, but also in salmon, plant-based protein, and also innovations in cultivated meat. So really across a portfolio of different food systems. And so as part of this food supply chain, we source on a daily basis raw commodities, so grains and livestock, from literally hundreds of thousands of producers globally that operate and produce food across tens of millions of hectares of pastures, range, and croplands across North, South America, Oceania, and Western Europe. So it's a very, very large footprint. And that supply chain is on the forefront of climate change. So farmers are the first to actually bear the brunt of the physical risks and the physical impacts of climate. Look no further than Brazil this year. So Brazil this year is currently experiencing the worst drought in its recorded history. Going back at least 700 years, it's the most severe drought. In the same year, it also experienced one of the worst flooding events in its history. So you have this cycle, a dynamics of extreme weather that is heavily impacting the ability to produce food and fiber from the landscape. So in terms of that tension, Dr. Schlosser, that you asked about, really what we're focused on, and actually building upon the previous speaker, and she was speaking of the energy transformation transition, we need a global food system transformation. That's something JBS is very keenly focused on. How do we collaborate with those farmers, those hundreds of thousands of producers we rely upon for our food security? And for JBS, we rely upon for steady, reliable access. So it's really ensuring we're mitigating the long-term supply risk so we can be, of course, a going concern and be able to feed a growing world. But it's also the challenges of feeding that growing world, where by 2050, we're going to have over 9.7, almost 10 billion people across the planet. How we feed that global demand of food, just from a calorie standpoint, consider this. We're going to have to produce as many calories in the next 30 years as a global food system as was produced over the preceding 10,000 years. How we do this without completely mining and extracting the vitality of our soils and our ecosystems to feed that hungry, growing world, to address food security, malnutrition. These are huge systemic challenges. So this is where we make it really part of the core strategy of JBS. We have programs and initiatives in Brazil, United States, Australia, where we have men and women out working with our rancher suppliers our grain producers on adopting precision agronomy solutions, precision nutrient management, better pasture and range management solutions to both not just mitigate climate impacts, but also then help them adapt to a changing climate. So it's really part of our long-term strategy to cushion the impacts, the physical risks of climate, but also to address and attenuate the greenhouse gas impacts of the food system.
And I guess you are aware that if you are not managing that, then your company and the industry in itself will have trouble to make it into the future.
I mean, we're fully vested, so if we could either lean in and try and be part of the solution, and this is because we are connecting literally hundreds of thousands, millions of producers with thousands of customers and millions of consumers. We're this really interesting intersection. If we're not part of catalyzing the change, systemic change, we're going to be effectively kind of victim to it. So we really want to lean into it and help guide a transition.
Yeah, being proactive. Maya, you in your business, you are helping companies, sectors to reach their goals, probably even to define their goals. How are COP targets helping you to define these goals and to convince your customers where they have to go and how they have to push?
Yeah, maybe just to step back and for the audience to understand what we do a little bit better, we're an end-to-end, Terrascope is an end-to-end decarbonization software platform. We're very much focused on helping companies in the land ecosystem, the land value chain, not dissimilar to Jason what you described as kind of food system is one of the systems, but to think about food, agri, retail, hospitality type industries to go through this multi-year, multi-decade transition to becoming net zero. One of the things I like about COP and the series of COPs, whether you take 29 or 30, is that it is a good forcing function of a checkpoint to say, is this a milestone? Because this is a multi-year transformation, it's a natural checkpoint to check in on how things are going. What we essentially are focused on in our work with customers, we're headquartered in Singapore, by the way, we're a global company. We're part of a very thriving ecosystem in Singapore around climate. But really for us, the focus is on bringing speed, transparency, and accountability through the use of software and machine learning for companies to say, what are my emissions? What am I going to do about it? But very often, even now, especially our focus tends to be around Scope 3 emissions, which tend to be the most difficult in being able to unpack. It becomes a very important stage gate. Measuring your emissions, including Scope 3, becomes a stage gate to everything else you do from a precision decarbonization perspective. The last couple of years, we've seen industry and customers really focus around that measurement journey. Can I start it? Can I get it right? But bringing speed and agility to that and repeatability to that then has freed up a number of leaders, like the folks here in the panel, to actually think about what are you going to do next? Where is the next dollar of investment spent for the next 10 years? Where is the next hour of time, of organizational time, which is precious, spent in being able to tackle decarbonization? So that's been a very big part of our focus. We see companies, as commitments have been made, go and start to peel the onion further and further. So we see companies actually think about, what are my land-based emissions? And Terrascope, what tooling can you enable me to do? How do I actually think about my supplier ecosystem? Can I get deep visibility? How many layers of my supplier ecosystem can I get visibility into? And last but not the least, do I look at all of my emissions just at a corporate level, or do I also, as a manufacturer or a retailer, start to look at emissions that I associate with at a product or SKU level? And it gives kind of a holistic view of how you think about this journey that you're on, and how do you parcel out the actions and initiatives you have to take into smaller bite-sized pieces that you can then put your arms around and say, are we making progress? And COP becomes a really nice point to say, here, look at what we committed. Were we on the right track? Are our emissions reducing? And sometimes business as usual growth drives emission growth, not reduction. And that's something we want, and that's a tension that we want the industry to sort of be able to embrace. So that's a little bit of what we see ahead of us.
Do you actually see a lot of movement in offsetting rather than changing operations? Because there is also some tension, at some point we are running out of offsets. So
that's right. I think a good question there. I think there is, on one hand, we see that with people committing to SBTi targets, you're focus is not a either or per se. The focus very first is there is a lot of low-hanging fruit, no regret moves that you can do in the operations of your business to be able to start decarbonizing. So the view that we take and the view that we see a number of customers that we work with is, why would you not do that, right? It's hard work, you need to be resourced to do it, but why would you not do that? I think there is a growing sense of a desire around standardization and forming coalitions to be able to tackle investment in credits, investment in high quality projects. We've seen, I'll bring some Singapore stories because that's sort of what we see around us day to day, but we see sort of Singapore has formed a coalition around the carbon ecosystem recently, and you start to see companies really come through and use coalitions like that to be able to say nature-based coalitions or otherwise to start to address some of the tensions in that ecosystem, the undefined parameters that are not standardized yet around quality credits and when do you use it and how do you use it. So I see these as complementary, but I think the focus for a number of industries that we're working with today is let's not wait to change things in our operations that we do control and in our supply chain.
Rohini, airlines are known to have, and air travel is known to have a large carbon footprint. And you actually can read it if you book a flight now. If you go to a web page, it tells me exactly how many kilograms of CO2 I'm using up for a flight. How are you approaching that problem, and how are COP targets helping you to push that forward?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and I'm very proud to be one of the only airlines, if not, to my knowledge, the only right now, that has published transparently our forecasted flight emissions on our booking path. Aviation is often referred to as a hard-to-abate industry, and part of that is because as United Airlines forecast out what our emissions, we forecast out what our emissions are looking to be in 2050, 45% of the emission reductions, of the 100% reductions we need, are from using less jet fuel. 98% of our footprint is the combustion of jet fuel. So it's not a matter of what's the problem, it's a matter of how do we resolve the issue. So 45% roughly of the forecasted emissions in 2050, those reductions can come from using less jet fuel. The remaining 55% is transitioning to a sustainable alternative for the fuel we will have to use as an energy source. And so that's where sustainable aviation fuel, or SAF, comes in. And the reason we're called hard to abate is because there is not enough SAF in the market today, and it's very expensive to produce, it's very capital intensive, and that means that it has a pretty high green premium right now. And I'm sorry to say, but if we could charge you a little bit more on a flight ticket, we would. So we're at max where we can really sort of pass that premium on. The reality is, at United, we are working with our corporate partners. We talk about Scope 3 targets. Our corporate customers across the globe, as they fly on us, are looking to also mitigate their Scope 3 travel emissions. So there's a lot of alignment there, and they can help us pay down the very high premium in the early stages of the SAF market today. We're also investing in future supply technologies, and so we have our Sustainable Flight Fund, which is not just our capital, but others investing in SAF. But that third nut is policy. And so when we talk about COP, when we talk about just engaging policymakers, it's about how do we create the right set of incentives. When we're looking at policies, we were talking about this a little bit earlier backstage, when we're looking at different policy mechanisms, even if they're obligatory, how do we do that in a manner that is driving economies of scale, that is really cracking the nut of infrastructure capital into new SAF production? How do we unlock those levers? Because that's what we're going to need. We're going to need billions of gallons of sustainable aviation fuel for this industry to meet its global targets. We're right now very proud to be in the hundreds of millions of gallons, right? So we have to recognize our progress to date is good. It's not fast enough. And really, I think policy is the key sort of unlocking lever. Talking to national governments about energy transition plans and where SAF can fit in that is exactly where we bring that discussion to COP as we attend.
20 minutes are flying by like nothing. We are down to 22 seconds. We just scratched the surface. We could talk for hours. What I take away from this conversation is that the targets that are set at COPs and other political gatherings or politically motivated gatherings are actually guiding at least some of your action. And so in that sense, I'm looking forward to see how the private sector is actually engaging in COP29 and hopefully being a larger driver than it is right now to move forward. Thank you very much. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.